Hello and welcome back to Alpha DevCon. Right now our section is Alpha Anywhere New Feature Review, and I am joined here by Selwyn Rabins. Hello, Selwyn, are you there?
Hi, Dave. Yeah, I'm here.
All right, so go ahead and click the camera button. We need to see proof of life, and people were just afraid maybe we just had recorded. Nope, you look live. Here we go. Fantastic.
Okay.
So today, my understanding is you're going to be going over things that you've added since last year. You've gone through the release notes, and yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's gone in there. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to show.
Yeah, we're going to just do a tour of what's been added since last DevCon.
Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter, and then we can both drop off camera.
Okay.
So that people can see the full screen. So I'm going to shut off the camera button. And you can shut off your camera button. The screen I'm looking at says, let's get started, connected to GoToWebinar.
Okay, so if I switch over to my PowerPoint, are you seeing my PowerPoint right now?
I sure am.
Okay, perfect. So good morning, everybody, and welcome. It's a great pleasure to be here again. Unfortunately, it's not in person, but I'm hopeful that by next year we'll be back to normal again. So we have a jam-packed session here of what's new, what's been added to Alpha in the last year. And so let me just move on to the next slide here. So since the last DevCon, we've had 8 significant releases of Alpha Anywhere with literally hundreds of new features. And so what I've done is I've tried to categorize the new features into different sections. So there have been new features for the IIS server and the classic server, the IDE itself, the UX, the grid and tabbed UI components, and we've also made improvements into the debugging experience for debugging server-side code. So what we're going to do now is sort of just a random tour of some of the new features that were added in the last year. And what I've got over here is a list of some of the new features that we're going to be talking about. So on the classic server and IIS, we've made it much easier to run and test with TLS, which is SSL, HTTPS on. And the reason that we've done that is that more and more services now require HTTPS in order to test them. So we needed to make it much easier, especially in the classic server, because that's where the development server lives, to run with SSL and to create self-signed certificates. For the grid, we've added a custom button bar and we've improved image upload. There've been a lot of changes and new features in the UX component. We've added the concept of local functions, which makes it control libraries much more powerful, and we'll be showing that. We've added JavaScript versions of radio buttons, checkboxes, and drop-down controls. And this is a big deal because it allows you to repopulate these controls using JavaScript. Previously, a radio button and checkbox were rendered in HTML on the server side, and it was very difficult to repopulate them at runtime using JavaScript. On reports, we're going to show how you can now display progress for long-running reports and cancel a report that might be taking too long. We'll show cascading lookups, which is a new lookup type. We'll show how lists can have fixed and floating footers, which is really nice. We'll show how a tree control can be rendered as a menu bar, and this has some important ramifications for your tab UIs. Then this is a big deal. We now have support for IndexedDB. So for those of you who are not familiar with IndexedDB, IndexedDB is an alternative to local storage, but unlike local storage, you can store a lot of data in IndexedDB. It's almost as much data as you can in the file system in a Cordova application. So that's important because even though we showed PWAs last year, we haven't released it. We are going to be releasing PWA into the nightly build very shortly. But because PWAs are not Cordova applications, in order for them to work offline and store large amounts of data, it's going to be necessary to use IndexedDB for persisting your offline state, and we'll show that. For the security framework, we've got a new template to manage users and groups at runtime. We're going to show that. For the login component, we've added a single checkbox that allows you to turn on login with Google. For the view box, we've added drag and drop. And then we've added a new container type called CSS grid, which allows you to create very complex responsive layouts. So we're going to be showing that. So then in the tab UI, we basically implemented menu bars. We've got a feature called favorites where you can mark certain of the menu buttons in your tab UI as favorites. And then we'll show this smart search feature, which is pretty interesting. For XBasic, we've now got debugging in background threads, which is a big deal because previously you could only debug in the foreground thread in XBasic. So if you were running a grid or UX component in live preview in the builder itself, you could do debugging. But if you were running in the browser itself, you could not do debugging. And since the security framework does not work in the live preview, but only works when you're running it in a browser, you were unable to debug into on-login events, and now you can with debugging in background threads. So we'll show that. Then for storage, we've added SharePoint, Google Drive, and Dropbox in addition to Amazon S3. We've added an integrated backup restore feature to the web control panel, including backing up your project to S3. For S3 uploads, for image uploads to S3 or file uploads to S3, we've added a new option called S3 indirect. So previously, for uploading to S3, we would upload directly from the browser to the S3 bucket after making a very lightweight AJAX callback to the Alpha server in order to sign the URL. But in order to upload to the S3 bucket, you had to have your S3 bucket properly configured for CORS because the upload was taking place directly from the browser to the S3 bucket. But with S3 indirect, where you now first upload to the Alpha server, and then on the Alpha server you can create thumbnails if you want, and then you upload to S3. It's no longer necessary to worry about CORS settings. And then finally, for people who are more comfortable with Python than XBasic, we've introduced the concept of calling Python code in your server-side scripting. So with that summary of what we're going to do, let's switch over to Alpha Anywhere and actually start demoing the features. So let's go over into Alpha Anywhere. So there we are in Alpha Anywhere here. And whoops, let me just get over to Alpha Anywhere. So what we're going to do first now is start out by showing how you can turn on the SSL for the server. So I'm going to just go over there to Web, and if I go now to Development Server, you'll see that basically there's enable TLS SSL button. And if you do that, then Alpha will automatically build self-signed certificates for you and register them. So it's now very easy in order to run with SSL turned on. And the same thing is true for IIS. So if I go here, for example, to Live Preview and I choose IIS, you'll see that there's now instructions on how to configure IIS to use HTTPS as well. So basically, when you launch your Live Preview using IIS, you get a dialog saying, do you want to use HTTP or HTTPS? So you can easily run the same page using either HTTP or HTTPS. And we've also basically got a feature here that enables debugging into your XBasic code when you're running under IIS. This is something that was not previously possible. So then on the grid, I spoke about custom button bars. So let's go over to this grid component here. And I'm going to just run it in working preview really quickly to show what the custom button bar looks like. So you can see there's a custom button bar. So normally the button bar is an alphabet button bar showing A, B, C, D, etc. But with custom button bars, you can make your own buttons that perform searches that you define. So now you can specify the styling for the button bar. And previously the custom buttons were one at a time. So if you press the London button, which does a search on London, and then you press the Paris button, that would do a search on Paris, but not an or London. So now if I press Paris, you can see that it's now London or Paris, and we have styling on those two buttons to indicate that they've been pressed. So let's go take a quick look at how this was actually done. So if we go back now to the alphabet button, and this, by the way, is also a new feature in the IDE, the ability to very quickly search for a particular property in the property grid. And this is nice because oftentimes the property grids are pretty big and it can be quite difficult to find the property that you're looking at. So what we've done over here is we've turned on the alphabet buttons over there. We've chosen a style of custom buttons as opposed to alphabet buttons. Then we've said that basically multiple buttons can be pressed. We've said that our operator is OR, so if more than one button is pressed, we're going to be ORing the conditions as opposed to ANDing the conditions, which is definitely possible. And then we've specified that the button style is buttons. But here's the important part where we actually define the search. So you can see here we've got 3 buttons, London, Paris, and Madrid. And if you click the London button, then we do a search for city equals London. And this is the CSS class that's going to be applied when the button is pressed. And that's the CSS class that's going to be used when the button is unpressed. And then then there's Paris and there's Madrid. So if we go now to our CSS, we can see now in the CSS that the button on color is green with a green border around the button, and the button off is blue. So that's how we were able to quickly define our custom button bar. And again, so if I go there now, so all the buttons are currently off. So I'll go there and turn Madrid on and London on. So now we're doing a search for London or Madrid. So that's the custom button bar. And then the image upload actions in Action JavaScript all now support image upload to S3 using S3 indirect. So let's now go to the UX component and look at local functions. So if we go now to local functions, so I'll just go here and type in XB local functions. What we'll see is that we have a button over there, and if we go scroll down here, we'll see that there are local functions defined over here. So there's some XBasic that has been defined for local functions, and it's defined with the control. So you can see that there is no XBasic that has been defined in the XBasic functions tab. So let me explain why this is important. And the reason that it's important is that a common practice when designing apps is to select controls and then turn them into a control library, so that you can then reuse those controls in other UX components without having to sort of start from scratch. And previously, if your controls that you put into the library referenced either JavaScript or XBasic, then the controls would not stand alone. So if you put them into a library and then copied them from the library into a new UX component, the XBasic functions and the JavaScript that were associated with those controls were not going to be included. So the controls themselves were not fully self-contained. So the other thing is that if you put this this control set into the library more than once, you could end up with name conflicts. So you can see here, if we go to this local JavaScript, we've got a special placeholder here called control ID, and this here explains how to avoid name conflicts. So if I go now to a new UX component, so let's just go here and say new UX component. So I've got an empty UX component now, and I'm going to go to the menu and then say load controls from library. And I'll just go here and say Ajax test. And now I'll go here and run it. And we'll see that it works because the XBasic was defined locally and was copied in when I created it. But we'll also see that if I go here and do it again, load a second instance of this Ajax test, now we have two instances running. And you can see here that when I press the first button, this div gets replaced as it should. And when I press this button, this div gets replaced as it should. So we're able to automatically rename the controls when you load them from the library to avoid name conflicts. So next, let's talk about radio buttons, checkboxes, and drop-downs as JavaScript controls. So go here, and I'll go to radio buttons as JavaScript controls. And first of all, let's go to the radio button itself, which is over there. And you'll see that there's a new property here called JavaScript control. So this turns this radio button from being rendered in HTML on the server side into something that is done client side. And then you can see in the settings tab, I've got quite a lot of control over the on icon, the off icon, and the colors, etc. So let's go ahead now and run this. So we'll see that our radio buttons look quite different than they would otherwise have looked. And this is because they're all done in JavaScript. And I can also now, using JavaScript, I can just repopulate this control. So right now it says small, medium, large. If I press this button, it's going to repopulate to X, Y, Z. And then if I go there and type in G and then repopulate, we can see we've just added another button over there, another control. And we, of course, we have a lot of control over the appearance of these radio buttons. And the repopulate is done by let's just go and look at the repopulate action. All that we're doing is we're reading the value out of that text box, which is X, Y, Z. And then we're turning it into an array by splitting on the comma. And then we're just doing a populate. So we get control, just like we get appointed to the radio button using the get control method, just like we would say to a list control. And then we call the populate method just as we would say for a list control. So this JavaScript control applies not only to radio buttons, but also to checkboxes and also to drop-down controls as well. So next, we're going to talk about reports and how you can display progress while a report is printing. So I'm going to close this down and I'm going to go over to reports, and you'll see that I have a report over here, and I've made this into a very long report by basing it on the Northwind orders table, which has a lot of records in it, but then I've put a lot of white space in the detail. So this causes the report to be pretty long. So if I just go over here into preview and then go to the last page, we'll see that this report now has 232 pages in it. So let's exit this, close that down, go back to components, and then go here to reports in this component. And then we'll see that in the definition of this button, what we've done is we've turned on allow chunk responses. We've said display progress message, and we've also said allow cancel. And this is the HTML for the cancel button and the cancel prompt, and then the template for the progress message that we're going to display. So let's go ahead now and save this, run this in the browser. So I'll just go turn my server on, run this in the browser now. And then press the button. So you can see there's the progress. And if I cancel the report, there's my cancel prompt, then I click OK. So I'll just press it again. So there we go. This will go up to page number 200 and something. And then it'll display the report. And there's our report. So the reason that having chunked reports is a big deal is that oftentimes developers build reports that are complex and take quite a long time to run. And when you make an AJAX callback, the browser is only going to wait so long for a response from the server. And after that period of time is elapsed, the browser will time out and close the connection. So so if you have a very long running report, it's conceivable that the browser might drop the connection. But if you do progress, then you're sending responses back to the client much more frequently. In fact, long before the report has completed. And as a result of that, you'll be able to keep the connection from the browser to the server live while the report is running. So as you can see, it's pretty easy to enable chunk reports. It's just a checkbox on the report action JavaScript to allow chunk responses. And then you can basically format the page display if you want very easily. You can also display the progress either in the window or you can display it in a div. So if I turn off, I forget where I put this, display progress in a window. If I turn that off, you can see then I can just specify a div anywhere on the page, which is where I'll be displaying the progress messages. But it's more common to display the progress in a window. So next, let's take a look at cascading lookups. So I'm going to close this down now. Go back to here and then go to cascading lookups. And we can see here we have a text box. And if we go down to the lookup property, we'll see that basically a new lookup type has been defined. So the lookup types previously were just grid, auto suggest, and edit combo, but now there's also a cascading list. So we have a cascading list here. So let's look at it in practice and then go ahead and see how it was to set up. So the cascading list is somewhat like a cascading drop down. So if I go here and open up the list, I get to see all the countries. And then if I hold my mouse over any one of the countries, we get a sub menu. So there's France, and then we get basically the companies in that city. And then we get the customer ID. So if I click that, it fills in the customer ID over there. So there's my cascade, and you can see basically it's a pretty nice user interface for displaying lots of choices to a user and categorizing them into different categories. So the way that this was defined is you can see we've got basically a dynamic query against the customers table, and then here are the fields to display. And the order in which these fields are chosen is significant. So basically, since country is the first field here, we're going to be displaying a list of countries, and then the submenu will be cities, and then the submenu from that will be the companies in that city, and then finally the customer ID. And then we've basically said that the data should be loaded with an AJAX callback. We can turn on dynamic filters if we want, so that we only display data for a certain country. So we'll do that next. And then we can display properties of the lookup window, like is there a pointer that points from the drop-down menu to the actual control itself, and then we can turn on animation. So right now we've got a cascading lookup that starts out with country. So you can see there's all the countries. But what if I basically first go to the country field here and choose, say, UK? Then what I would like is I would like to leave out the country field and go straight to UK. So let's go ahead and try that out now. So first I need to remove country from the fields to display. So now my first field is city. And then I'm going to go turn on a dynamic filter. And my dynamic filter here is that the, if I edit this, that the country field in the lookup table should equal the value of the country drop-down control. So let's go ahead now and try this out. So go into working preview here. Set this to say UK and then drop it down. So you can see I just see the cities now, and then I can go there and choose my customer ID. If I go now to say the USA, and then there are the cities there that are in the table for the USA, etc. So cascading lookups are a nice new type of lookup that you can add to UX components. So next we're going to talk about list footers and displaying summary values in lists. So we'll go here and go to list footers. And first I'll display it working, and then I'll discuss how it was actually done. So I'm going to go here into working preview. And you can see here that at the bottom of this column quantity, we have a summary value over there. And you'll see that basically as I scroll, this footer is fixed in place. So there are two types of footers. There's basically a fixed footer, which this is, and there's also a floating footer, which appears at the end of the list data. So I would scroll to the end and then I would see the footer. And you can also see that we're displaying summary values in the footer over here. And previously, summary values could be displayed, but you had to write JavaScript in order to do that. So let's go see how this is actually done right now. So I'm going to go back to my list here. And we'll go first of all to quantity. And we can see that I've turned on summary values. And we've turned it on as a server-side summary value over there. Then I'm going to go to the list layout, and we're going to go to quantity. And you'll see that there's a checkbox here that says has column footer. And then if we bring up the definition of the column footer, you can see that we can display fixed column footers, or we can display data column footers. So these are the floating footers. So let's turn this fixed footer into a floating footer. So we'll go there, and what I'm going to do is grab this template, Control X, and then save it, and then go here and put this in the column footer, and then just paste this in now. And go OK. And so now we're going to only see that summary value when we get to the end of the list. So now there's no summary visible yet, but when I get to the end of the list, you can see there's the total for quantity, and then there's the value, and it's been formatted with 2 decimal places. So let's say we wanted to also show the average quantity. So what I would do is I'll go back to my list, and then I'll go to the layout, go to the quantity field over here and open up the template builder. And then I'll go here and I'll put in a break, BR. And then I'll go here and I'll type in average. And then I'll say insert summary field. So there's server-side summaries. We want quantity and we want the average. So you can see there's my placeholder, there's the average. And now I want to format this with say 2 decimal places. So I'll bring up format directives and then I'll choose, say I'll choose this value here with no decimal places. No, actually that doesn't make sense. Let's choose one that's got 2 decimal places over there. Okay, so you can see it's put in a format value over there. So let's go ahead now and run this. And move it down. So there's our average with 2 decimal places. So the nice thing about these column footers is that if I show and hide columns, the footers are still going to stay in place, and you know, there's no, you don't have to worry about keeping the footers directly underneath the appropriate column. So if I were to go and turn on resizing of these columns, so let's just quickly go back here, take our layout, go to quantity here, let's go and edit it. Let's take this template and move it into the fixed template. So I'm going to go there and move it into the fixed template. So the fixed template can have a certain number of rows, can have 1 through 5 rows. I'll just choose 1 row. I'll paste the template in over here. And then what I'm going to do is turn on column resizing. So I'll say that this column is resizable and this column is resizable. So we'll go ahead there and run it. And you can see there's our footer directly underneath it. And now I'm going to go here and resize the column. Actually, it's actually what I'll do is I'll make the window smaller. So we can see that basically the column footers stay directly underneath the column in which they have been placed. So that's a very nice addition for lists that have to display summary values, either computed server side or client side. So the difference between server side and client side is that you can see that this list right now is only displaying 5 rows at a time, even though the list itself has 2,155 rows in it. So these summary values are for the entire 2,155 rows. So if I go and do a search and I say quantity is equal to say 3 and then run the query, you can see that our summary values now change basically. And since we're searching for only quantities of 3, the average is still 3, but the total is now 138 for all 46 records in the query. So that's list footers. Then let's talk about trees as menu bars. So I'm going to close this down here. And I can see I don't have an existing sample, so I'll just start from scratch. So I'll go create a new UX component. And then I'll go and add a tree control. I'll call it tree 1. And I'm going to just add some static text with a div, and you'll see why I'm doing that in a few seconds. So I'll go there and I'll put div 1 over there. So now I've got a div over there. So let's go to this tree here. Excuse me. So we've got right now render as tree, and we're going to use the Genie to actually build the tree layout. So I'm going to go here and say add alpha, beta, gamma, and then under alpha, I'll go here and say A1, A2, A3, and then under A1, I'll say A11 and A12, and then under beta, I'll say B1 and B2, and then under gamma, I'll just type G1 and G2. So I'll go ahead now and save that. So this is now going to be looking like a tree control. So there's our tree alpha, you can see. And now what I'm going to do is turn this tree into a menu bar. So you can see we've got render as tree. So I'm going to change that to menu bar. And then it basically says, should be saying basically the div. I'm not quite sure why it's not seeing that. Let's just see if this actually, I don't see how this can work if it doesn't ask me for the div. Oh, it is displaying it as a, so let's just go and make it 50%. Oh, it's the tab UI that needs the div, sorry. So there's the tree displayed as a menu bar now. So there's alpha, beta, gamma. So those are the top level menu items. And then I can go there and see the tree. So this is very much like the old navigation component that people used to use before the tab UI was popular. So this would allow you to create a traditional sort of user interface where you have a menu across the top, and then you might have a div in the center where these menu items here might open different components in that div. So, but that's one way of doing it. But another way of doing it is to use a tab UI. So let's go to this tab UI over here. And if we go to controls, we can see that we have basically a pretty extensive tree control over here. And right now it's being displayed as just a regular tree. So if we go into working preview, we'll see there's our tree over there with all of our menu items. And now if I go and I say, no, display this as a menu bar, and then it's asking me for a div, which is where we're going to display this menu bar. So let's go over to properties here, and we can see that in the header, I've put a div over here. So I'll go here and I'll just type in some text. So this would typically be, say, maybe an icon for the company. And let's go ahead now and run this. So there's the text div one. There's my first drop down: maps, charts, control options, etc. So I might, if I do this, I might also want to then just display this window, hide that window over there. So I'll go back to design mode, and then I'll change the button panel from left to none. And let's go back into working preview now. So you can see we don't have the button bar anymore, and we just have our drop-down menu. So this becomes another way of creating applications that look like applications that you might see created with other products, where they typically use a menu bar across the top for the different choices in the application. So next, what I'd like to talk about is IndexedDB. So in order to show IndexedDB, what I'm going to do is close this down, and then I'm going to make a list control. So I'll make a new list control. I'm going to base this list control, say, on the customers table from Northwind. So I'll go here and I'll just say list one. And then we'll go here and we'll say it's SQL, that my connection string is Northwind, my table is customers, my fields are customer ID, company name, contact title and city. And then I'm going to go here and say, don't render this list until I do an explicit refresh. And then I'm going to go there and choose my columns. Then I'm going to go to my list properties and say, I want to persist the data to storage. And I'm going to choose as my option IndexedDB. So there's IndexedDB turned on right now. And then I'm going to basically just add another button. So I'll turn on restore data in the list. And then I'm going to just add another button to refresh this list. So I'll go there now, and I'll just move that button up, go into Action JavaScript here, type in list control actions, and then go there and go to refresh data, and then go to list. So I'll save that now, and I'll run the component. So I'll call this IndexedDB. And I'll go into working preview. I'll open up the Chrome debugger. I'll go to applications, and then you can see IndexedDB. I'm going to go and delete the IndexedDB that's currently there. So I'll delete it. So there's no IndexedDB right now. And then I'm going to go here and press refresh to go get the data. And now I'm going to go look at the IndexedDB again now. So you can see that we've basically put the list data in the IndexedDB. So there's the IndexedDB, and there's all of the list data. So now if I were to basically go back and then come back in, the list is going to be refreshed automatically from IndexedDB. So the reason that this is a big deal is especially for mobile applications where you take a lot of pictures. So pictures typically are big. And if you're running as a Cordova application, then when you take a picture, we store the picture. We put the picture in the file system, and then the list gets the name of a file. So the data that gets put into the list is not that much. It's just a file name. And when you persist the list to the file system, you're not persisting that much data. But if you're doing a PWA that needs to work offline, when you capture a picture, the picture data gets stored in the list as base 64 data, and that's pretty big. So that would make the list pretty large. So what happens behind the scenes is that the base 64 data gets put into the IndexedDB, and then the list itself just has a reference to the IndexedDB. So that means that you can then use PWAs to store massive amounts of data while you're offline, including many pictures, because it's all being stored in IndexedDB. So in summary, IndexedDB is an alternative to local storage that gives you much more space, much more available space than local storage does. In fact, IndexedDB, I think, can use half of the available disk space on the machine. And it's very easy to use IndexedDB because there are methods in Action JavaScript that let you easily write stuff to IndexedDB. So if I go here and search for methods, and then I go here and type in IndexedDB, we can see that we have, where is it? IndexedDB. We can check if it's available. We can store a key value pair. We can get a key value pair. We can delete a key value pair. We can see how many entries are in the IndexedDB, and we can read the value of an individual key. And then finally, we can clear out the whole IndexedDB. So the difference between IndexedDB and local storage is that local storage is synchronous, and IndexedDB is asynchronous. So that means that if you do a get keys or get value, let's go and say get a value, or get item, you'll see that basically it takes an on success callback or an on error callback. But we also have the ability to use the same function as a promise. So you can basically do get IDB get item promise, and that allows you to write more modern looking JavaScript with promises. So IndexedDB is I think it's a big deal, and it's definitely much more performant than local storage. Another big benefit of IndexedDB over local storage is that on a mobile device, the browsers can, at their discretion, clear out local storage if they're running low on memory, and you can just lose all of your settings that you've put into local storage, whereas the browser will never just clear out IndexedDB. So next, I'm not going to actually demo this, but this is going to be coming out in a release really soon. So I've added it in the What's New builder. You can see that there's now going to be a button right there on the toolbar called PWA that will let you build a PWA from any one of these UX components. So for people who are not familiar with PWA, that stands for Progressive Web Application. And the nice thing about a PWA is that it can be installed on the home screen of the device. So what I'm looking at over here is my iPhone, and you can see I've got a PWA over there that's installed. So it looks just like any other installed application. But when I run it, oh, sorry, I've got to press the button here. The PWA loads, and it loads pretty quickly. So there's my PWA. And if I basically go there and relaunch it, it comes up instantaneously. And if I remove it from memory and then launch it, it comes up instantaneously. And the nice thing about a PWA is that if I make a change to this UX component and republish the PWA, when the PWA gets reopened, the UX component is automatically refreshed. So I think that once we release PWAs shortly, they'll become basically in many ways the preferred way of creating mobile applications, because it's easier than building a Cordova app. It can be installed on the home screen of the device just like a Cordova app, and it doesn't need to go through the sorry about that everybody. It doesn't need to go through the App Store. So next we're going to talk about the security framework and a new template to manage users and groups. So let's go back to the web control panel. So I'm going to move my phone out of the way, close this down, and go back to the control panel. So I'll go to Window. Oh, I don't know if I have the control panel open still. So Web Projects over here. So what I'm going to do now is make a brand new project that has the security framework turned on. So I'll go here and say New Project, and I'll call it Dev Con Demo 2022, and then I'll turn the security framework on. And then you can see here that what we allow is we allow you to, at the same time that you turn the security framework on, you can also build your extended user information table, and you can also build these other system tables if you want as well. So I'm going to basically go here and say I'd like to build an extended user information table, and I'm going to choose my connection string, so I'll do that, and then I'll give it a name. I'll call it underbar extended 2. So I'll go ahead now and enable the security framework. So it's built sample users and groups for me, and I'll choose image on the left. So there's my new project. It's got a login, it's got a tab UI, and it's also basically got this new component here for managing users. So the reason that this component is so important is that a lot of people get confused because in the builder here, you can go to users and groups, and you can basically add new users and groups. But it's important to understand that what you're doing over here is defining what are called seed users and groups. So especially if you're using IIS or Alpha Cloud, in both of those, Alpha Cloud runs under IIS, and the security is handled by the Microsoft membership provider. And so at runtime, users can create new accounts and change passwords, etc. And those edits and changes are not reflected in this over here in the seed users and groups. So you can't, once you've published your application, you can't change a user's password, etc. You have to use this admin component. So let's go ahead now and test this out. So I'll go live test. I'll go to the login component and I'll run it. I'm going to log in as user one, who's an administrator. Just make sure I've typed in the password correctly. So we'll go to login. So there we go. So now we're at the tab UI, and you can see because I'm an admin, I have this manage users and groups. So, so this is a component that I think any developer who's building an app with security framework turned on is going to want to use this component, because what it does is it lets you manage all of the users and groups at runtime. So these are my users. This user one is an admin. User two is part of group two, but if I want to make him part of group three as well, I can just go there and say save changes, and now we've saved those changes. So now we're looking at the data from the user perspective. So now we can switch to groups. Now we're looking at the data from the group's perspective. So these are the users who are in group two. We can see that user two is in group two, and in group three we have user two and user three. If I want to edit the user, I can go back to users, double click on user one, and then that brings in the, I can change the user password. But since we have an extended user information table, I can also set values in the extended user information table, including turning on two-factor authentication for this particular user. And then finally, what I'd like to demonstrate is that you can also import users from an Excel sheet. So I've created an Excel sheet that's got a whole bunch of users in it. So I'm going to just go over to my Excel file here. And you'll see I've got a little Excel file here with basically 6 new users, user 101 through user 105. So I'm going to just go here and say import, upload the file, and go to this file there. So you can see that as it imports, it's showing progress. And now we've imported the file, and there's all of our new users, users 1, 2, 3, etc. And there's a text, there's a results sheet here that has the results of each import statement. Did it succeed or not? So you can see that this is my result. So the new user was created and it was added to group 101. So this was so we added a new user and we also added a new group. So this this component that we're looking at right now, is ideal for any developer to add to an existing application, and it replaces several of the sample template UXs that we used to ship with Alpha. So if you've got an existing application, you can just go to new, and then you can go to security, user roles maintenance page, and then you can add a page to your existing project that enables you to use the new admin console, admin component. So I think that's a pretty nice deal. So let's go now and go back to web components here. I'll go to this login, and we'll go to properties here. Then I'll scroll down to the login section, and I'll just turn on allow using Google, and then I need to configure it. So in order to configure it, you need to get you need to have a Google, you need to go to the Google Developer Console, create an application and get a client ID and secret. So that's not difficult, but there are a number of steps involved. And so you can click this button to bring up the instructions on how to actually do it. So this gives very extensive instructions on how to create the project, etc. But if you want to basically, you can also do this. You can just save your credentials and then load them as well. So if you're building an app and you want to use the same credentials as you've previously used, it's easy if you just basically type them in, save it, and then you can just load them as I've done over there. But I'm not going to do that. So let's go ahead now into a working preview. And we'll see that basically because I turned on that button, we now have a new button here that's got login with Google. And if I were to click that button, it would bring up the Google login page where I can basically use my Google credentials to log in. And what you can also see in the builder is that if we go back to the builder here, there's a Google settings property over here. So that basically says that if the user logs in and they don't currently have an account in the security framework, create a new account, or you could say no, deny login. So let's say that I log in with Google using my Google address, but I do not currently have an account in the security framework. If we choose deny login, then I will not be able to log in. If we choose create login, a new account will be created for me, and I'll be put into whatever groups I select over there. So the login with Google is a powerful addition, and we will be releasing information on how to build login with Google into Cordova applications, and we also will be adding login with Facebook and login with Apple to the UX component as well. So I think that's a pretty nice addition that's to the security framework. So let's just go there and now take a look at the view box again. So one of the things we've done with the view box is we've added drag and drop. So let's go here to drag and drop over there. And if I run this, now we see basically this is a view box. We've got two divs, and you can see I've got div 1 now. I can just pick it up and move it anywhere and then just drop it, and it tells me that it's dropped. So let's take a look at how this was done, because it's actually pretty easy. So we go to the view box and we go to the view box layout, and you can see we have two divs. Div 1, which this is our red div, and then div 2, and this is our blue div. The important thing is that you can see both of these divs have a A5 item attribute called drag 1. So if we go over to A5 items and we look at drag 1, we'll see that there's a property that says drag is on, and it's you can drag either when you down hold or just press down. So if I say draggable is equal to no, then if I go and run this component again, you'll see that I cannot move div 1, it's not draggable. So all I had to do was basically set its item to be draggable and then specify whether the drag takes place on a down hold or just down. So I'll just leave it at that. You can also turn draggable on with, instead of not just yes or no, but you can have a function so that returns yes or no. So you can see it can be a function that, so you can make an element draggable only if certain conditions are true. So the ability to do dragging is very important. And if you do turn dragging on, then you get these new events: drag hold, down hold, drag start, drag move, and drag end. And you can see that if we do this, the events have information about the position that where you've moved the component, where you've moved the element. Sorry. So so that's not a nice new addition to the view box. And the view box is, I think more and more developers are learning to use the view box. It's a really powerful control, and it's a great way of displaying data in a UX component. So next we're going to take a look at CSS Grid. So I'm going to go here and go to CSS Grid. So CSS Grid is a new type of container. So you can see there's our container, and the container subtype is CSS Grid. But we have a whole bunch of different container subtypes, you know, which you're familiar with, like repeating sections, pane header, pane footer, control group, etc. So CSS Grid is just a new control type, a new container type, and then you can go and define the grid layout. So you can see what we've done here is we've said that we've got a grid with 4 rows and 6 columns. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 rows and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns. We've said that there's 5 pixels between each cell, and there's 2 pixels between each row. Then furthermore, what you can see is that inside this container we have all of these controls, and now these controls can be placed on the CSS grid in different cells to create very precise and responsive layouts. So let's go take a look at how this actually works at runtime. So you'll see we have first name and last name on the same line, and they both are the same size. Then we have address on the next line, and address takes up the full length. Then on the third line, we have city, state, and zip. And what we've done is we've said that city should be 3 times the size of state, and zip should be 2 times the size of state. So now, and we've also said that this button should be on the extreme left and this button should be on the extreme right. So let's now go and resize our container. So you can see that as we resize the container, the buttons are still positioned correctly, and everything is still relative sizes, but so it's fully responsive. So this city field is still 3 times the size of the state field, and the zip field is still 2 times the size of the state field there. So now let's go back into the CSS grid here. And you can see that if I click on first name, that shows me where first name has been placed. If I click on last name, there's last name. So we can see here that first name starts in column 1 and it spans 3 columns. So we can see there's starts in column 1 and it spans 3 columns. And then there's address, which is basically spanning the entire, it goes all the way to the end. And there's button 1, which is it's in the start position, and then button 2 is in the end position. So let's go now and remove, clear all controls from the grid and see how we add them. So now you can see we have an empty grid. So now we just need to click on this cell here and say we want first name over there, and then we want it to have a span of 3, sorry. So now we've got first name going all the way across there. Now we'll go here and we'll choose last name. And again, we'll make it a span of 3. And then we'll go over here and we'll put button 1. And then we'll go over there and we'll put button 2. And we'll basically say that our horizontal justification is end. So now we basically column count cannot be below 7 because of settings inside the container. So I'm not quite sure what that means. So let's just go ahead and run it now. So we did not place all the controls in the grid, but you can see we have our button on the left and our button on the right. and we've got our controls there. So the CSS grid is a really nice way of positioning controls on a UX component. So next, what I want to talk about is the tab UI. So let's go back to the tab UI. And I've already shown how you can create a menu bar. So what I'm going to do now is look at something called favorites. So I'll go here into my tab UI here, and then I'm going to go to search here and say favorites. And right now favorites are turned off. So I'll go now into working preview. And there's my tab UI with all the buttons. So what is common in many applications is that you have many buttons in your app, but only a few of these buttons are used by your users on a frequent basis. So you might want to sort of designate certain of these buttons as your favorites so that you can find them more easily. So let's go back to design mode here and turn on favorites. And then I'm going to basically I'm going to turn off show the favorites in the menu bar. So I'll just go and run this now. So you can see now basically each button has a little icon there. So I can make that into a favorite, and then I get a favorites section over there. And if I had to find an extended user information table, or if I had to find a repository table, these favorites would be remembered for this user. So if I went to another computer and logged in as the same user, the same favorites would have been selected. So if I were to go there now and choose the grid from the favorites bar, it's going to load that grid. I can then turn a favorite off by unchecking that button over there. You can see we've turned those two favorites off. And when we turn them on, the favorites appear in a category, and that category has a name called favorites, and its initial state is open. But we can also display the favorites in a menu bar as well across the top of the screen. So let's go back now and run this again. And now we can see we're adding favorites to our menu bar. So favorites are a really nice way of displaying choices in the tab UI that you want the user to be able to get to very easily. So that's a nice addition. So next I'd like to talk about smart search. So let's go close this down, and I'm going to go to a component called smart search, and then I'll explain how I'll run it, and then I'll explain how we built it. So the way smart search works is it's built on top of the search feature, which has already been in the product for a long time. So the search feature lets you easily find buttons that match certain criteria. So I can go there and just type in CUST, and you can see this is my results. So this is the customer grid, and if I open the customer grid, it's going to just go ahead and open the grid. But what I can also do in the smart search is type in values, and you'll see that if I type in, say, London here, and then press enter, I think it's got to be London with a capital L because it's so now what happened is the smart search said, oh, London is a value in the customer grid. So I'm going to open up the customer grid and then just show records for London. If I now go here and type in, say, Paris, and press enter, the grid opens and it shows records for Paris. On the other hand, if I go here and I type in, say, Bollard, what I've configured this is to say, if you type in a valid customer ID, then open up the orders UX components. I'm going to go there and press enter. And you can see that the UX component is opened with Bollard over there. So the smart search can not only basically be used to search for a particular button, but it can also be used to search for a particular value. So let's go and see now how we set this up. So I'll go here and I'll type in search. So there you can see we've got enable search turned on. And then we've turned on smart search over here. And then here is our smart search definition. So the way the smart search works is you have a set of rules, and the rules get evaluated from top to bottom. And the first rule that is true gets executed. So let's go take a look at this first rule. So this rule basically says that if the rule is true, and the rule is defined in XBasic, so there's the code, I'll go through the code in a minute. If that rule is true, then press the customers button. So press the customers button and open up a grid component over there. And then if we go look at rule number 2, here's our rule. And this rule basically opens up, clicks the UX orders button if this XBasic here is true. So let's go take a look at the XBasic for the first rule. So if we go edit rule and then define XBasic, you'll see that there's a lot of help here that shows you what the syntax needs to be. But essentially what we're doing is we're saying, let's open up the Northwind database. Then e.search is the value that the user typed into the search box. And we're saying do a query to count the number of customers that match city equals the search box. And then if that count is greater than 0, then open up the grid, but override these properties, set the base filter to city equals whatever the user typed in, and set the arguments, the search argument to e.search. So the flag is true, the condition has been met, and so therefore we're going to basically open up the properties of this. And this here tells you that if you're opening a grid, you can set these properties. If you're opening a UX, you can set this property. And if you're opening a report, you can set those properties over there. So now let's go take a look at rule number 2 and look at our XBasic. And over here, what we're doing is we're again going to the Northwind database. And now we're doing a count of the number of customers. Actually, this should have been from orders where customer ID equals what ID. And then we're overriding the, I think I'm on the wrong. Open a grid if customer ID is valid. This open a UX if customer ID is valid. And that's the UX component. This doesn't look right, but that sort of doesn't really matter. The point is that this is how you define the different rules and at runtime basically. So the rules can be either used to, the search part can either be used to select a button or to actually perform a search and go directly to say the customer grid with a search in place. So for users who are using the tab UI very frequently and are using certain patterns that are quite predictable, the smart search feature is a big deal. So in the short time we have left, I'd like to show the improvements to XBasic debugging. So let's go back to there, and then I'll go here and there we go. So you can see that what I have is I have a component that has a button, and this button makes an AJAX callback to an XBasic function called XB. And you can see that inside this function XB, I have debug 1. So if I run this in working preview or live preview, the debug 1 works, But if I run it in the browser, the debug one previously did not work, and now it will. So let's go first into working preview. Press the button, and up comes our debugger, and there's our debugger line over there, and we're debugging into the code. And the same thing is true in, and there's our hello, in live preview as well. I could also debug into the code. So there we go. So there's the debugger opening up. But now let's run it in a browser. So now we're running it as a web application in the browser in a background thread. So now I'm going to press the button, and you can see that the debugger still opens up. So the reason that this is a big deal is that there are some situations where you need to debug, but you cannot debug in the live preview window. You have to be debugging in the real application. And that would include, say, something like a server-side on login event if the security framework is turned on, because you cannot turn the security framework on and work in the live preview button. You have to be running it in the browser. So now with the ability to debug background threads, you can then debug your server-side on login event. Then I'm going to just mention briefly storage. So we've always been able to store files using the A5 storage functions in S3 buckets, but now we've also added SharePoint, Google Drive, and Dropbox as options for storing files, and that's all done by creating connection strings. You can see if I go here to the web control panel and I go tools, create a storage connection string, new, and then let's go here and say build, and we now have all of these options now for Amazon, Azure, Disk, Dropbox, Google, SharePoint, and Wasabi. So there's new options for storage. And then finally, I'd like to just mention that we've now got directly in the UX component, we have backup and restore. So when you hit backup, you can back up to a folder on your machine, or you can back up to a storage connection. So right now I can go here and do a backup to, let's go there and back up to, I can either back up to a folder on disk or back up to storage location, and then go select my storage connection string. So I'll say London over there, and then I'll say slash backup, and then click OK. So there I'm backing up to my bucket in the London region, and I'll say backup. So this is now creating a backup and then uploading it to S3. So there's my URL for my backup, and I can now go to any new project and then restore that backup. So now I can go now and restore. Oops, go back to backup, restore. We'll go to, sorry, a new project. I'll make an empty project. And then I'll go restore. So there I've restored the files to this new project from the cloud, which is nice. So then I'll just mention on image upload. Previously, if you uploaded images to the Alpha server, you were able to create thumbnails. But if you uploaded images to S3, you were not able to create thumbnails because the image went straight from your browser to S3, never touching the alpha server. But now we have a new option called S3 indirect, and with S3 indirect, you can do thumbnails, because what happens is the image gets uploaded first to the alpha server. Then on the alpha server, the thumbnails can be created, and then the image and the thumbnails get uploaded to an S3 bucket from the alpha server. And then finally, I should mention that you can now execute XBasic Python code on an Ajax callback. So let's go back now to our DevCon 22 and then go to Python. And so go over there into working preview. And I'm going to basically press Ajax, which is going to run some Python code, and then press this button, which is also going to run some Python code. So let's go take a look at what happened there. So if I go look at this button, it's making an Ajax callback and to a function called XB2. And now let's go look at XB2. So here is XB2. And you can see that what XB1 does is it says make a function call to a library called myPython and to a function called myReport, and pass in session and request to the Python code. And in the Python code, I can set values in session. So I can set session variables. So I'm going to go now and take a look at the Python code. So let's go back to Windows, go to the control panel, go to Python over there, go to all files. And there's my, go to Python. And then double click on this to open up the Python script in Visual Studio Code. And you can see here's our code. There's our Python code. And our Python code is making use of Alpha Anywhere, Alpha DAO. So this is a Python, a library that you can import into Python. And you can see that in our Python function, we're setting the value of a session variable, session var1 over there. And then over here, we're executing SQL and then sending back some JSON. So the reason that we have integrated Python is that there are many developers who are quite comfortable with Python that are not quite yet comfortable with XBasic. So the ability to write your server-side code in Python is a big deal. And furthermore, if there are many open source libraries that do certain things in Python that aren't yet available in XBasic. So the Python ecosystem is pretty big, and being able to tap into the Python ecosystem in your server-side code is a big deal. So I can see that we're pretty much out of time right now. So this is what I wanted to show for the new features that were added since the last DevCon. And in the remaining time, Dave, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Selwyn. We have 7 minutes and 7 questions. So let's see how quickly we can get through them. The first one had to do much earlier on at the beginning when you were talking about debugging in a background thread. When you were launching and there was an option for launching a preview using IIS, is that correct?
Right.
Okay. The question had really to do with licensing. Do you need to have the Alpha Anywhere IIS application server installed and running in order to use that option?
You do have to have it installed, but you don't have to have a license. So you can install IIS on your development machine for free.
Yeah.
And if you're running it without a license, then you're allowed to have 5 sessions. So basically, you just go to the universal installer and you select on the available tab, you'll see available IIS. You just install it and then you're all set.
Superb. The next question.
I should mention that that's not available in the community edition, though. That's only the full developer edition.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Thank you. Second question, cascading lists. How do you choose the order of the fields when it populates?
So the cascading lookup, basically, the order in which the order in which you select the columns is relevant. So if we go back, if I go back to web components, and just turn off this, and then I go to my cascading lookup, and then go to the definition over here. You'll see that the fields to display, this is the order: city, company, and customer ID. If I wanted the first choice to be country, I would have to choose country. I would have to unselect these, choose country, because if I choose country now, it's going to go to the end of the list. So that's no good. I need country to be the first thing in the list. So the order in which the fields are selected defines the order of the cascade.
Gotcha. And in terms of the actual data itself coming through, is it just?
That's the terminal value. So basically, okay, if I undo this, what gets filled in, this customer ID here is the terminal value.
Wonderful. Next question. Can the cascading lookup, can it work if you're using the type for using dropdowns in which you have an ID column and a value column, which are separate from each other, or is it not work that way?
I don't know, to be honest.
We'll
I think it works, but I haven't tried it.
By the way, just as a quick reminder to everyone out there, if you do have questions and we don't get to them in a particular session, send those questions into guides to uides@alphasoftware.com. We'll be happy to get you an answer. Next question, just a real quick one on PWAs. Do they generate their own? Does they generate its own manifest file? Someone has asked.
Yes.
Okay, superb. So
basically, the PWA builder is very similar to, in fact, this is what it's going to look like. So you can see here, it asks for all of these properties, basically the PWA name and the cache name, the dynamic cache name, the pages, the master icon, the theme color, etc. So there's just a dialog to fill in. You press OK, and it builds the service worker, it builds the manifest, it builds the whole thing. It's pretty amazing. It does everything.
Awesome. Someone has a concern about the debugger, and the concern is this: that today, before we introduce, say, the ability to do debugging in a background thread, debugs were pretty much ignored when they were being run, when the application is being run. So if you left a debug statement and it wasn't a big deal,
right?
Is that still going to be the case, or do you have to be careful and remove those debugs?
No, it's still not a big deal, because the integrated debugging works in the development server in the IDE. It does not work in the actual standalone server.
Wonderful.
So you can leave debug ones in, and it's going to be no problem.
Fantastic. Let's see what else we've got. The tabbed UI, is that a responsive controller, or is that really best for web applications?
It's best for web applications. Gotcha. You can build a tab UI lookalike as a UX component, and then you can make that responsive.
Right, gotcha. And will the security components still work with PWAs?
Yes.
All right.
But the thing about a PWA is that it's intended to be a single page application. So, you would have to make an AJAX callback to refresh data, yeah. And that would require a connection. So the nice thing about a PWA is that it'll load even if your phone doesn't have an internet connection.
Mm-hmm. So if you wanted to use PWAs, you would need to be connected to use the security application, of course, because your credentials aren't stored right on your phone.
Right.
But you could still take advantage of the other things that PWAs have to offer, like You don't have to put it in the App Store in order to gain access to a huge amount of on-device storage and
So
things
you
like that.
don't have to put it into the App Store. You have a huge amount of on-device storage. And you also have the ability to create an icon on the home screen so it looks just like a native application.
Yeah. Very good. Well, we have come to the end of our time. If there are questions that we missed, I'm sure there is one or two, could you send it into guides@alphasoftware.com? That goes for suggestions as well. Selwyn, thank you very much for presenting.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
That is the end of this session, and we're going to go into Introduction to the Data and Data Value Chain with Greg Bowling coming up in 30 minutes at 11:45 Eastern. Hope to see you there. Bye-bye.